Hey everyone! Today, we're going to talk about something mysterious, shocking, and maybe even a little bit frightening. We're going to explore one of history's biggest cover-ups, the Dark Ages. You've probably heard this term before, but do you really know what it means? And why is it considered one of history's most misunderstood periods? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you might see history in a completely new light. Introduction to the Dark Ages. The term Dark Ages usually refers to a period in European history between roughly 500 and 1000 AD. This was after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a time when Europe seemed to lose a lot of the progress it had made. People often think of this period as a time of ignorance, poverty, and violence. But here's the first twist. Calling it dark might not be entirely true. Some historians argue that this idea itself is part of a huge cover-up, or at least a big misunderstanding. So why do people call it the Dark Ages? The term came from Renaissance thinkers who looked back at this time and thought it was a period of decline. They compared it to the bright, shining world of ancient Rome and Greece, and later, their own rebirth of knowledge and culture during the Renaissance. To them, this time seemed dark, because fewer records were written and less art and architecture survived. But that doesn't mean nothing happened. What really happened in the Dark Ages? In reality, the Dark Ages were not completely dark. Yes, there were hardships. Wars were common. Disease spread quickly, and travel was difficult. But at the same time, people were rebuilding societies, preserving knowledge, and inventing new technologies. For example, monasteries became centers of learning. Monks copied ancient texts by hand, preserving the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans. Without them, we might have lost works of Aristotle, Virgil, and other great thinkers forever. People also developed new tools and farming techniques. The heavy plow, for instance, allowed people to farm more efficiently in Northern Europe. And small kingdoms and communities were forming the foundations of modern Europe. So why do we remember this period as dark? Part of it is because of who writes history. History is usually written by the winners or the powerful. And when the Renaissance thinkers wrote about the past, they wanted to make themselves look better. They painted the time before them as backward and foolish, creating the idea of the Dark Ages as a period of ignorance. The big cover-up. Knowledge lost or hidden? Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Some researchers suggest that the Dark Ages were not just misunderstood, they were a kind of cover-up. Why? Because much of the knowledge and achievements of the time were hidden or ignored. Take science and medicine, for example. Many people believe that nothing happened in medicine during the Dark Ages, but that's not true. Medical knowledge from the Greeks and Romans was preserved in monasteries and in the Islamic world. While Europe struggled to rebuild after the fall of Rome, places like the Middle East were making great progress in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. Later, European scholars borrowed much of this knowledge during the Renaissance. Even in Europe, some inventions appeared during the Dark Ages. Mechanical clocks, eyeglasses, watermills were all developed or improved during this time. It wasn't the complete darkness that history books sometimes claim. But because the Renaissance wanted to portray themselves as the great rebirth of civilization, these innovations were downplayed or forgotten. The role of the Church. The Catholic Church played a major role in shaping how the Dark Ages were remembered. After the fall of Rome, the Church became the main source of authority and knowledge. Monks preserved ancient texts, built libraries, and educated young people. But the Church also controlled what ideas were allowed to spread. Some historians argue that the Church may have contributed to the cover-up by limiting access to knowledge. Certain texts were hidden or censored, and ideas that challenged church teachings were suppressed. For example, early scientific discoveries were sometimes ignored or dismissed because they conflicted with religious beliefs. This made it seem like Europe had stopped progressing when, in reality, knowledge was just being carefully controlled. The mystery of the lost history. Another reason the Dark Ages seem mysterious is because so many records were lost. Invasions, wars, and natural disasters destroyed countless manuscripts. Libraries were burned and towns were abandoned. Because of this, historians today have to piece together history from fragments. Imagine trying to understand a 1,000-piece puzzle with only 200 pieces. That's what studying the Dark Ages is like. Some of what we know comes from archaeology digging up old towns, tools, and buildings. Other knowledge comes from letters, religious texts, and chronicles. But many details are missing, which makes it easy for myths and misconceptions to take over. The Dark Ages in popular culture, movies, books, and games have added to the idea of the Dark Ages as a scary, violent time. We see images of knights fighting in muddy fields, peasants starving, and kings ruling cruelly. While some of this is true, it's not the full picture. Life in the Dark Ages was actually diverse. Some people lived in small, tight-knit communities that were surprisingly safe and well-organized. Trade continued in certain areas, and towns began to grow again toward the end of this period. The exaggeration in popular culture helps reinforce the dark image. Over time, this became a self-reinforcing story. People assumed the Dark Ages were a time of ignorance because that's how it was always described. This is one of the biggest examples of how history can be shaped and sometimes manipulated by those who write it. Hidden achievements of the Dark Ages. Let's take a closer look at some achievements that are often ignored. Architecture. While the grand structures of Rome may have been gone, people built new forms of architecture. Romanesque churches, with their thick walls and rounded arches, became common. These buildings still stand today as a testament to innovation. Technology. As mentioned before, mechanical clocks, windmills, and watermills were important inventions. These technologies changed daily life and agriculture in Europe. Learning. Monks and scholars preserved classical texts, as I said earlier. But they also created new works of their own, writing histories, poetry, and religious texts that still influence us today. Trade and economy. While early Europe may have been poorer than Rome, trade routes slowly reopened. Markets and towns grew, laying the groundwork for the later medieval economy. All of this shows that the Dark Ages were not completely dark. They were a time of transformation and survival, a period of rebuilding after a huge collapse. Why this matters today? You might be wondering, why does it matter if the Dark Ages were dark or not? The reason is simple. Understanding the past shapes how we see the present and the future. If we believe in the Dark Ages myth, we think that progress can suddenly stop or that knowledge can be lost forever. But if we understand the truth that people continue to innovate, learn, and adapt even in hard times, we see that humans are resilient. History is never simple. Every period has light and dark sides. The Dark Ages, as a cover-up or misunderstanding, reminds us to question what we're taught. Who wrote the history books? What stories were left out? And how can we find the truth? The controversy. Finally, let's talk about why the Dark Ages are still controversial. Some scholars today refuse to use the term Dark Ages because it's misleading. They prefer Early Middle Ages or Late Antiquity to describe the period more accurately. The controversy continues because the idea of a dark period is so deeply embedded in popular culture and education. By re-examining this period, historians have uncovered evidence of cultural exchange, technological innovation, and political development. The more we study, the more we realize that Europe was not as backward as we were once told. This makes the idea of a cover-up even more compelling. The story we were told for centuries was not the full truth. So, what was history's biggest cover-up? Maybe it was the idea of the Dark Ages itself, a period called dark because of missing information, cultural bias, and selective storytelling. A period that, when studied carefully, shows human resilience, innovation, and adaptation. The Dark Ages were not a time of total ignorance. They were a time of survival, transformation, and preparation for the centuries to come. Next time someone tells you the Dark Ages were just a time of ignorance and despair, remember this. History is much more complicated than it seems. And sometimes, what we think of as a cover-up is really just the story of how humans survived, learned, and kept knowledge alive against all odds. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Dark Ages were really dark? Or is it one of history's biggest cover-ups? Let me know in the comments below.